Hello, hello. Chamber Jazz Ensemble, give them all a hand. All right, my name is Jonathan Armstrong. I'm the Director of Jazz Studies here at ISU. Each semester with the Chamber Jazz Ensemble, we try something new. We travel around the world. We've done Brazilian music, we've done Egyptian music, we've done Eastern European music, and then this semester we're gonna stay here in the country, and we went with a bunch of New Orleans tunes. So that song is called Do What You Wanna. It's a classic song from the Rebirth Brass Band, which is a modern New Orleans second line group that features a bunch of brass and saxophones and drumming. It comes from the old school marching bands of New Orleans, the people that would play after funerals and wedding celebrations and all kinds of things. And they would march down the street playing a bunch of renditions of Christian hymns and all kinds of spirituals that they knew, and then they would just sort of do these arrangements on the spot. So, in the spirit of that, first of all, we got ourselves a couple of sousaphones. How about a hand for Cameron and Abby? That's a traditional bass instrument of New Orleans music. Actually, before the string bass, it was all sousaphones, and before the pianos, it was all banjos, but we don't have a banjo. But we have Sam. How about Sam Patosh on the piano? So that was more of a New Orleans kind of a thing, and we're going to go back in time to the 1930s now with a couple of Louis Armstrong songs. Louis Armstrong, I'm sure everyone in here has heard of, one of the greatest sons this country has ever produced, just a brilliant musician, a genius human being, and by all accounts, just a wonderful person. Not only was he someone that pushed jazz soloing forward in terms of its sophistication and ability and connection to humans, but he also pushed forward arranging. And his arranging skills were unmatched at the time, and even today it's sort of remarkable what he was able to do. A common misnomer about old school New Orleans music is they're just sort of making it up at the time, but no, he spent many, many hours with the other musicians around him. In the collective improvisation that you hear on all those Louis Armstrong recordings was actually after a lot of very exacting, rigorous rehearsals so that everyone could fit into these tight spaces around each other. So for these next two songs, what we're performing is transcriptions that I did of those collective improvisations, and we've just sort of moved them around the band and tried them with our fun instrumentation up here. So this next song is called Jelly Roll Blues. It's actually a Jelly Roll Morton song, another classic, incredible jazz artist from before Louis Armstrong's time, but it's Louis Armstrong's arrangement of Jelly Roll Blues. And then we're going to do the New Orleans classic, When the Saints Go Marching. This next one, as I was saying, When the Saints Go Marching In, a bit of a fuzzy origin story. No one really knows who wrote this song. Best guess is that it came from one line of a Christian hymn where they sang When the Saints Go Marching In. But it took on a life of its own with all the marching bands, and then it became a staple of New Orleans funerals. So when people would pass away in New Orleans, they would throw a party, right? They would throw this big party and celebrate the person's life. And this is meant to be a bittersweet song where you're celebrating the person's life with a lot of joy, even though the song is about moving on and spirits as they move on. So here's When the Saints Go Marching In, and the arrangement that we're playing is very inspired by the Louis Armstrong arrangement, who took it and made it his own, and that's probably why we know it outside of New Orleans. It's because of Louis Armstrong. All right. Okay, this will be our song of the first set, and then the big band will come up, play some songs. This last one is called Dumaine Street, which is named after a street in the Treme district of New Orleans that Trombone Shorty grew up. Anyone ever heard of Trombone Shorty here? Yeah, good. Trombone Shorty is the, I think the band's like 30 years old or something like that, and he's absolutely the current torchbearer of old school New Orleans music. And by that I mean he's moving the music forward. He has basically a rock drummer and a rock guitar player in his band. They do a lot of New Orleans style stuff, but they play a lot of like straight up rock and roll music as well. So for this song, and actually with the first song as well, in order to honor that music, we learned everything by ear, which is to say that they didn't get any notes in front of them on their stands. They learned everything by ear, which is super cool, right? That's the old school style. You don't ever see these New Orleans marching bands with stands, right? You don't see them with the little marching stands that they put on their instruments. Everything's learned by ear. Everything's like a folk tradition. So here we are, playing Trombone Shorty's Dumaine Street. And how about one more hand for the Chamber Jazz Ensemble? 5 minutes. We'll put a big band on stage. Hey, it's the big band. That was our first composition by John Williams. All right, one more hand for the Chamber Jazz Ensemble, the New Orleans style Chamber Jazz Ensemble. And then one more hand for the sousaphone section. This is still a good band despite our lack of sousaphones. Do not let that concern you. We're going to play 4 compositions. They're all just classic swing tunes. For those of you who have been to big band and jazz shows before, things can get weird on stage here, right? But tonight we're just going to play right in the classic, right in the pocket. 4 brilliant composers, 4 great straight-ahead jazz writers, and you'll get to meet all of them and their interesting personalities and quirks. This first one is called Lazy Day by Toshiko Akiyoshi. Toshiko is a jazz pianist who was born in China, but she's Japanese. She's born right around the 1930s, I think 29 or 30 or something like that. She was a young Japanese woman growing up, heard a jazz record, heard a Teddy Wilson record, and just became obsessed and got every jazz record she could in the 40s and became a jazz pianist that would play at bars and clubs. Oscar Peterson was taking his trio on the road. Here's Toshiko at like 22 playing in a bar and convinces his record label to do an album with her. So there's this great Toshiko Akiyoshi jazz piano album with Ray Brown and Herb Ellis and all of Oscar Peterson's guys. She moves, they convince her to go to Berkeley. She studies in Berkeley, the first Japanese student to ever study at Berkeley. She becomes wildly successful as a pianist, and then she starts writing big band tunes along the help with her husband, Lou Tabakin, who's an outstanding saxophone player. So, if you've never heard of Toshiko Akiyoshi, I highly, highly recommend her writing. It doesn't sound Japanese in the slightest, in that she's not like using a bunch of Japanese scales or anything. She sounds like a New York person. Like, it's just fantastic writing, and this is one of my favorite charts she did. It's called Lazy Day. You're going to hear from Mal Lane on the trombone, you're going to hear from Gabe Lohman on the piano, and you're going to hear from Curtis Day on the baritone saxophone. great. Toshiko Akiyoshi, yeah? It's a great chart. Mal Lane, Gabe Lohman, Curtis Day, solo. Those ain't what you call easy changes either, so those were really nice solos over some complicated harmonies. All right, we're moving on with another classic big band writer. This is Frank Foster, a wonderful tenor saxophone player who got his start with the Basie band coming out of the Army. Actually, I think he was born around the same time as Toshiko, late 20s, early 30s. In the Basie band, he ended up contributing some of the most popular charts that they played, and eventually he took over Thad Jones's band in the 1970s, I believe. Great writer, wonderful saxophone player. Everyone remembers his charts, but he's an underrated tenor player. So for those jazz enthusiasts out there, go check out some Frank Foster. He's just a wonderful saxophone player, kind of in the vein of Dexter Gordon, real laid back, smooth sound. And you're going to hear his personality and his phrasing in this chart. This is just a great Basie chart. One of my favorites. It's called Shiny Stocking. So you're going to hear from Mal Lane again and Gabe Lohman. You're also going to hear some nice stuff from Sean McLean on lead trumpet and the rhythm section. Here we go. Lane, Gabe Lohman. Joseph Emmanuel on the drum set. Sean McLean way up high on the partials. Yeah. Saxophone section, Ryan Tomlinson on lead alto. Awesome, great. Yeah. That's fun. Isn't that a great chart? I just love that. Great, band. Next song, a bit of a ritual for me. Mike Barone. Mike Barone was an LA-based writer, still kicking. He's in his 80s by now. When I was in Los Angeles, I lived there for 7 years. I think in my third year, I auditioned and got in his band as the lead tenor player. And I played in that band for 3 or 4 years, doing all kinds of random gigs and recording sessions, did a couple albums with him. He became a very good friend of mine, and I just loved his writing. Being inside of a band like that, every Tuesday afternoon from 10 to 12:30 at the Musicians Union, we would rehearse. And I just love his writing, and my favorite part is through his 60s and 70s and now 80s, he's still pushing himself and writing different kinds of charts. He's just a wonderful writer. You would know his stuff. He wrote a lot for TV. He also wrote for The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. He wrote the bulk of the charts for the Doc Severinsen Orchestra. So for those of you old school Tonight Show fans, you heard a lot of Mike Barone as like Dom DeLuise would walk on to get interviewed by Johnny Carson. So as you can imagine, back in the day, you have to play a ton of music in between the guests and on all the commercial breaks. And so he got his 10,000 hours in, so to speak, writing for the Johnny Carson band. And as I left for Idaho, which he was very confused about why I would move to Idaho from Los Angeles, but he doesn't get it, man. It's great here. He gave me a giant box of charts that he didn't have any use for. And then since then, he's uploaded a ton of big band charts on the internet. We asked him why. He's like, no one pays for these things anyway, so I might as well give them away for free. So I'm playing all of his charts for free. And I'm biased because I was in his band and I'm a very dear friend of his, but just all of his charts work. They're just great charts. And this is another one. It's called Rows of Toes. It's a really great blues chart. You're going to hear from several folks on this one, and enjoy Mike Barone's Rows of Toes. Jesse Malloy on the guitar, Brenna Hale on the trombone, John Seiler on the trumpet, Curtis Day on the baritone saxophone. All right, we got one more chart for you. Another fantastic writer, Oliver Nelson, also famous for TV, also an LA composer. If any fans of Columbo? Yeah. Oliver Nelson's all over that. Wrote all those really cool, mysterious, like Second Viennese School, funky horror scores. He was also a great writer. He had a fantastic album called Blues in the Abstract Truth. It's one of the seminal jazz albums with like a sextet or something. It's like a four-piece horn section. But eventually he had his own big band in LA throughout the 70s, and it was just the hottest band in town. When I was living there, people would talk about going to those concerts as if it was a religious experience. They just had an amazing band, some of the best players in town, and they all loved Oliver and his writing so very much. And I think he's a great American writer, one of the greatest big band writers we've had, and this is their closing number they would play at the end of their sets. It's an arrangement he did on an old, like a Dixieland classic called Jada. And it's just a fun bluesy tune that we're gonna leave you with, so thank you all very much for coming. Huge thanks to Bill and Ron and the crew. Please give them a hand for making us sound good. And one more hand for all the student musicians of the Chamber Jazz Ensemble. And one more hand for all these fine young men and women of the ISU Big Band. Have a great evening. Thanks for coming. Thank you all so much for coming. Have an amazing evening. ISU Big Band, ISU Chamber Jazz Ensemble. Yes, students. Yeah, great. Have a good evening.